The night sky has always been a canvas for human imagination. For centuries, we have looked upward in awe at the stars, marveling at the endless expanse stretching far beyond our understanding. With the dawn of aviation, that same sky became not only a dream to admire but a frontier to conquer. Airplanes transformed what was once an unreachable horizon into a pathway for connection, uniting cities, nations, and entire continents in a mesh of invisible routes drawn across the atmosphere. But behind the marvel lies a truth both haunting and undeniable. The sky, as much as it gives us freedom, has at times swallowed entire machines and the lives within them, leaving behind nothing but questions suspended in quiet darkness. Imagine the sensation of sitting aboard a plane just before takeoff. The engines hum with controlled strength, the cabin lights flicker softly, and passengers glance around, some nervous, some impatient, others already lost in their headphones or sleep. Soon the aircraft rolls forward, gathers momentum, and rises into the air, the city shrinking beneath as it heads out above the clouds. For most, this is routine, the start of a holiday or the return home. But for a small number of flights throughout aviation history, the moment of ascent was not the beginning of a journey but the closing chapter of a great and impenetrable mystery. Because on certain occasions rare, but chilling planes have vanished from the skies as if erased by unseen hands. No mayday. No wreckage. No conclusion. Just silence. These disappearances stand apart from known tragedies. In accidents where a cause can be determined, however painful, there is closure and lessons to prevent repetition. But mysteries, the kind where no probable cause can be declared, where entire investigations close without resolution, are different. They fester in the human mind. They linger as unanswered echoing questions. What really happened up there? What was the final thought of the passengers, the final gesture of the crew? Were they betrayed by hidden flaws in machines, by human choices, by acts of violence none could predict? Or did something stranger occur, beyond our models and simulations, beyond our comprehension? Among the countless flights that cross our atmosphere daily, most are uneventful, blending into the great rhythm of human transportation. But when one of those journeys fails, when a plane does not arrive, when signals abruptly halt and air traffic controllers face only static, the order of aviation collapses into chaos. Search teams mobilize, satellites scan, ships depart into the ocean. Families gather in airports, clinging to screens for any update. Reporters circle with relentless questions. And yet sometimes, after days, weeks, and years, what remains is only fragments that drift ashore, pieces too small to explain the entire fate of a massive machine and the souls it carried. There are some losses that become legends, embedded deep within our psyche as modern myths. Among them, none is more haunting than Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. In March 2014, that plane took off into a perfectly ordinary night, carrying 239 people. It climbed into the darkness and then, inexplicably, vanished. To imagine the moment is to conjure a sensation of shattering impossibility. A jetliner is not a speck of dust to be lost in the wind, it is a machine of immense scale, fitted with communication systems, transponders, radar signatures, a vessel that should always be trackable. And yet, shortly into its journey, MH370 ceased to exist on screens that were designed to never lose sight of such craft. What followed has been described as the most expensive, most complex, and ultimately one of the most unfulfilled search efforts in human history. authorities traced suspected routes across vast stretches of ocean, leading to the conclusion that MH370 may lie in the unfathomable depths of the southern Indian Ocean. Massive undersea surveys were launched, deploying sonar, drone submersibles, and advanced mapping techniques. Yet the wreck remained hidden, cloaked as if by the Earth itself. Flotsam, pieces of wing and cabin materials, slowly traveled on waves toward distant shores, confirming the simple truth that the plane had met destruction, but withholding everything else. Who made the final decisions? What pressures weighed on crew and passengers? What sequence of events turned an ordinary flight path into an enduring ghost story of aviation? The answers slipped beyond our grasp, and with them, the closure longed for by families and investigators. But MH370 is not alone in its shadowed category. History gathers several other accidents, each wrapped in questions no one can fully resolve. Long before, in 2009, Air France Flight 447 went missing on a transatlantic route between Rio de Janeiro and Paris. It disappeared into night and rainstorms, leaving behind desperate speculation. For over 2 years, searchers scoured the Atlantic depths. When at last the black boxes were recovered, much was explained, a chain of technical failures and human confusion magnified by weather. That case shows both the torment of long uncertainty and the relief, even if painful, of final understanding. MH370 still waits for such deliverance. Further back, in December 1945, 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers took off from Florida as a training mission known as Flight 19. Hours later, contact ceased. 27 men were gone. A search plane sent to help vanished as well. That eerie doubling of loss pushed the imagination of generations, fueling the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. Rational explanations have been suggested: disorientation, instrument failure, weather, but the absence of wrecks and witnesses keeps the myth alive. Flight 19 remains an enduring emblem of aviation uncertainty, one where facts blur with folklore, and each telling carries an uneasy chill. Even cases with traces, with wreckage and survivor testimonies, sometimes resist neat summation. Consider EgyptAir Flight 990 in 1999. The plane plunged rapidly from high altitude into the Atlantic, taking over 200 lives. U.S. investigators suggested intentional actions taken by a crew member. Egyptian authorities rejected the reasoning, pushing alternate views of mechanical troubles. Decades later, the disagreement continues. Did one man's silent decision drag down an entire jet, or did machines fail catastrophically, leaving humans to be wrongly accused? Here lies a different kind of mystery, not the absence of evidence, but the presence of so many interpretations that certainty dissolves into national tension and cultural disbelief. These stories, and many more scattered across the annals of aviation, form a constellation of enigmas that refuse to fade. They are connected by atmosphere, by silence, by absences that are louder than any crash site found, louder than any concluded report. At times, investigators find themselves haunted not by what they discover but by what remains forever hidden. Black boxes, when they are recovered, give voice to the final minutes. But when they are not, when only sea and sky remain as witnesses, the haunting deepens. Entire careers have been defined and consumed by the attempt to solve such riddles. Sleep is interrupted by voices of the vanished. Decades pass but the questions remain suspended. For those who listen tonight, let your mind drift into that strange territory where the secure and the uncertain mingle. breathe softly as you picture the radar screen in a dark control room, glowing with dots that represent lives cradled in the air. Each dot moves steadily, predictably, as it should. Yet imagine the moment when one dot flickers, hesitates, then fades. Controllers blink and check again, assuming a glitch. They call out to the plane, their voices urgent but calm. There is no answer, only a silence thickening by the second. That silence does not diminish. Hours later, the dot has not returned. A straightforward night has become a labyrinth, and every soul aboard that lost aircraft has entered history as part of an unresolved aviation mystery. And so, this opening chapter unfolds in the hush of your room, weaving stories of disappearance and darkness. While sleep may pull softly at your eyes, these mysteries linger on the edge of consciousness, between the known and the unknowable. As you drift downward into dreams, imagine the sky not only as a route for travel but as a vast theater of questions so large they cannot be fully answered. In this theater, machines vanish, voices cease, and explanations remain always just beyond reach. Somewhere above oceans, perhaps far below them, fragments of truth are hidden, waiting, resisting discovery. Until the day they are found, their silence continues to speak. When a plane vanishes, the first hours are always the most strange, filled with confusion that blurs into dread. At air traffic control, voices overlap, reports clash, instructions repeat with increasing urgency. Controllers are trained to recognize anomalies instantly, but when a plane goes missing, at first the systems betray them. There is often hesitation, a fragile moment where large institutions are reluctant to admit what the silence really means. Maybe communication equipment has failed. Maybe the aircraft's transponder has switched off accidentally. Perhaps they are in a pocket of weather interference, or a routine technical error is delaying signals. But then the minutes turn into hours, and the pattern of other flights confirms what should be impossible. A craft carrying hundreds of lives has stopped existing within the network of modern monitoring. Machines designed never to vanish have somehow been swallowed whole, as if returning to an airspace before technology. For Flight MH370, that silence grew into one of the most colossal efforts in search and investigation. The chain of circumstance that night in March 2014 reads like a puzzle scripted to torture the modern mind. Soon after departure, pilots checked in, their voices calm and procedural. Nothing suggested fear or strain. Then, as the plane crossed from Malaysian to Vietnamese airspace, its transponder quit transmitting. Radars lost its symbol. Civilian observers stopped seeing the plane. Yet military radar later revealed a twisting turn, a movement suggesting deliberate human choice, steering back across Malaysia's peninsula into deeper waters. Why would a plane make such a deviation silently? Why head into remote ocean tracks with no explanation? That question remains poised like a blade at the heart of the case, and every attempt to understand what happened branches into dozens of theories, some grounded, some wild. Malaysia, Australia, China, and dozens of nations poured into the hunt. It was a global effort, a sweeping conversation across navies, air forces, satellites, oceanic survey vessels, and data scientists attempting to reconstruct the ghost path of a missing jetliner. Search corridors traced across the southern Indian Ocean like a scar on the map. Algorithms modeled where wreckage might drift, where currents would carry fragments of wing and fuselage. And from time to time, debris did rise from the waters, washing on beaches of Réunion Island, Madagascar, Mozambique. But each shard only deepened the unsolved riddle. The evidence confirmed destruction somewhere at sea, but still avoided giving any chronological story of the final descent. Investigators could not prove whether the aircraft exhausted its fuel and fell in a quiet glide, or whether it plunged wildly in its last moments, torn into fragments on impact. To this day, the ocean floor holds its secret with a stubborn silence that technology cannot fully penetrate. The agony left behind is not only technical but profoundly human. For families of the passengers, the waiting was more terrible than any ordinary accident report. Every press conference promised answers, but each ended with uncertainty repackaged in new words. The relatives traveled to airports, to official halls, to embassies, seeking fragments of truth. Some clutched photographs, some wore clothing marked with appeals. They held up signs demanding transparency. They refused to let silence become final. Entire family groups staged vigils, staring at ocean maps with eyes too tired to weep further. For them, missing aircraft were not abstractions, they were fathers, mothers, children, lovers taken by an absence. The absence gnawed at them, leaving grief unresolved, grief without a grave. Around the world, experts dissected technical scenarios. One camp believed in mechanical catastrophe, fire on board, hypoxia in the cockpit, progressive failures that disabled systems and crew. Another camp suspected deliberate interference, a hijacking or a suicide by pilot. Both camps fought in online forums, in news studios, on conference panels. Voices grew emphatic because the mystery left such vast empty space for speculation. Even official authorities split at times, unwilling to close on one narrative. For almost every piece of evidence, another interpretation exists that cancels it, leaving investigators walled inside a labyrinth. The public followed these debates with obsessive intensity, for there was something universal in the fear of vanishing mid-air, of disappearing into nothing without closure. But to understand the weight of MH370 fully, one must consider the context of earlier mysteries. In 2009, Air France for 47 went missing above the broad, midnight Atlantic. After hours of confident routine, the Airbus A330 vanished during a storm zone. For months searchers scoured the sea, hauling wreckage above water but finding no definitive recorder. Only 2 years later did robotic submersibles draw the black boxes from the Atlantic deep. And when finally decoded, they revealed a tragedy woven by technical weakness and human error. Iced pitot tubes misled pilots about airflow, confusion compounded altitude misjudgments, and in the storm's turbulence, human responses diverged fatally from required maneuvers until the giant machine stalled irretrievably. For loved ones, painful as the truth was, at least it was truth. AF for 47 shows the cruel difference. Waiting years is torment, but eventually tapes can speak, logs can explain, and minds can rest however uneasily. For MH370, no such redemption arrived. No flight recorder has spoken, no human voice from the cabin's final minutes has been heard. This absence creates a metaphysical dimension. For investigators, what they cannot know presses heavier than what they can. Throughout aviation's century of advancement, accidents have almost always yielded to science. Eventually, reasons reveal, even when buried deep in mechanical failure or cloud behavior. But here, the enemy is not only technical error but the vastness of Earth itself. The Indian Ocean is immense and hostile. Its depths are among the least mapped places on the planet's surface. To hide wreckage within its folds is to bury artifacts in something akin to outer space, an inner space so dark and crushing that the ocean claims mastery over man's technology. The search zones drawn were the largest in aviation history, sweeping millions of square kilometers. Huge ships dragged sonar arrays for months at a time, only to emerge with maps of ridges and valleys, rocks and ridges, no signal of the plane. That effort was so exhausting that it changed how humanity perceives unknown accidents. It taught us there are places we cannot yet reach, places where even billion-dollar technology cannot drag truth into daylight. The silence of MH370 shaped culture. Docuseries proliferated, books were written, theories contested in popular magazines. Some clung to conspiracy, imagining shadow programs, secret abductions, desert hideouts. Others parsed radar data with forensic obsession, charting possible pilot routes intended to maximize fuel before falling into the southern seas. Amateur sleuths built their own maps, tracked currents, argued across nations. The plane's absence became almost mythic, a modern Bermuda Triangle reincarnated for the digital era. For the passengers' relatives, these waves of speculation compounded the wound. Every theory was both a hope and a torture, promising answers but delivering shadows. Yet MH370 is only one thread in a larger tapestry of mysteries. Because aviation, though largely safe, has collected several fissures where unexplained events slip through. At the core, these are accidents without probable cause, cases declared unsolved. For regulators, such classifications are nightmares. Aviation thrives on certainty, on a safety record built by learning from every accident. Each crash studied and explained brings modifications to procedures, adjustments to policies, improvements to machines. But an unexplained disappearance leaves no lesson, no change, only a lingering vulnerability. That is why such events haunt investigators most deeply. They represent the opposite of progress, a place where knowledge cannot yet write its victory. The enigma extends beyond airliners into military aviation. The story of Flight 19 in 1945, where 5 torpedo bombers departed and never returned, stands as a particularly enduring case. Somewhere over the waters off Florida, they apparently became disoriented, their compasses unreliable, their navigation flawed. Communication signals revealed confusion between pilots and their commander. Later, silence fell. Searchers never found reliable wreckage. And eerily, a rescue plane dispatched to locate them also disappeared, multiplying mystery with tragedy. That dual vanishing amplified the folklore of the so-called Bermuda Triangle. Over time, skeptics argued the incidents could be explained by navigational mistakes and poor weather conditions. Yet the fact remains, no definitive wreckage has ever been confirmed as belonging to Flight 19, leaving uncertainty yawning open, ready to be filled by myth and imagination. Such mythologies remind us how disappearance works upon the human mind. When absence has no end point, imagination rushes in. Where science steps back because evidence is missing, narratives sprout, formed by culture, fear, and hope. That is why the Bermuda Triangle continues to fascinate, and why MH370 is discussed in language of conspiracy as often as in language of engineering. Humans cannot tolerate endless silence. We must weave an explanation, even if fragile and improbable, to mend the wound of not knowing. The unsolved accident, more than the explained crash, destabilizes the sense of order upon which we rest every time we board a plane. When you close your eyes tonight, think of an aircraft in the high atmosphere, ocean stretching below unseen, cabin lights dim, passengers breathing softly in their sleep. Outside, only stars. The cockpit glows with screens presenting data streams. Everything feels calm, as ordinary as thousands of flights that night. But then, picture the sudden absence of signal, the dot vanishing from a controller's radar. For those inside, moments may pass unnoticed until they do not. The memory is haunting precisely because it cannot be confirmed. Were people awake as the plane veered away in new direction? Did they sense anything unusual, or was the cabin calm until the very last? Because we do not know, the imagination paints possibilities endlessly. For investigators, cases without probable cause are more than incompletions, they are specters. Reports filled with meticulous data and analysis finally conclude with helpless words, undetermined, probable cause cannot be established. Those words feel like defeat. They mark the limit of knowledge, admitting that technology, investigation, human effort all collided with the unyielding wall of missing evidence. And perhaps that is why such reports haunt them later at night, long after careers move onward. Because each unsolved tragedy whispers that somewhere, safety is incomplete, and until truth is found, no one can promise absolute reassurance. As sleep descends, hold that thought gently, without fear. These stories are not told to terrify but to reveal how fragile our sense of control remains, even in the most technologically advanced systems. We build machines so vast, networks so intricate, yet sometimes the sky and sea remind us they are larger still. The mystery carries both dread and wonder, confronting us with boundaries of understanding. In this way, aviation's greatest unsolved disasters are not simply tales of loss, but reminders of our place in a universe still containing secrets. When planes vanish, they echo something beyond mathematics and maps. They show us there is always, hidden within progress, a realm that remains unknowable. So as you lie here in the quiet, listening, let your mind wander with the stories of these vanished flights. Feel the rhythm of history, the patterns of human search and error, the endless quest for answers. Let the vast ocean rise in your imagination, dark and boundless, dotted with ships seeking signals. Let the stars above glimmer coldly, the same stars seen by pilots before silence fell. Against these scales of sky and water, human certainty appears small, almost fragile. And yet, within that fragility lies the enduring beauty, the drive to seek truth, no matter how elusive. That search continues, and in the silence of unresolved mysteries, humanity's persistence burns, like a light refusing to go out, even against the darkest sky. There comes a moment in every story of disappearance when the search itself becomes part of the tragedy. At first, it is driven by urgency, an assumption that perhaps survivors wait somewhere, or a floating fuselage might be spotted, or signals will resume with explanation. Search planes fly in tight arcs, ships send sonar pulses through waves, and satellites are commanded to re-examine the regions they once passed over without attention. Nations coordinate, experts propose new models, families cling to announcements. But as days pass without discovery, the mission evolves. It moves from rescue to recovery, from recovery to research, and from research into something timeless, where the lost object becomes ghost-like, no longer a machine, but a riddle, an unanswered call echoing far longer than anyone ever expected to hear. For Flight MH370, that transformation was sharper than most. The Indian Ocean seemed to mock humanity's technology. Its surface is vast, but beneath lies another realm, folding downward for miles through valleys, cliffs, trenches, plains of darkness so cold and crushing that nothing survives without adaptation. To hide a Boeing 777 within those depths is to erase it in practical terms, making it less recoverable than spacecraft lost beyond orbit. Ships combed the surface, scanning, towing long cables bristling with sensitive devices, producing map after map of the seabed. Some areas had never been charted before, and thus the hunt revealed unexpected worlds, mountains under the sea, fields of rock shaped by volcanic processes, trenches deeper than guessed. Yet none of these formations yielded the outlines of a jetliner. The ocean revealed its geology but not its secret. The new maps were triumphs of cartography, but for families, they were bitter, because they were not the maps they wanted. The silence was relentless, not a silence of peace but one rebuking every question. Even when fragments finally escaped that watery tomb, clinging to waves and drifting toward shores, the fragments became only puzzle pieces without enough companions to form a picture. A part of a wing confirmed impact. A panel confirmed breakage. But the immense majority of the craft, along with its passengers and recorders, remained absconded with. Evidence without narrative is torment. A man might find a photograph of a door but never the house, a fragment of a sentence but never the conversation, a cracked clock face but never the hour it displayed when it broke. It is not absence that kills. The total vanishing would almost be gentler. It is the teasing presence of fragments refusing to complete a story. As the investigation continued, theories were measured against the parameters of those fragments. If the plane glided gently after fuel exhaustion, debris would scatter differently than if it careened wildly into waves. If it was flown deliberately toward a remote point, that changed assumptions about motivations, pilot decisions, possible final intentions. If it was crippled by sudden fire, electrical malfunction, or decompression, evidence would differ again. Lacking full wreckage, almost every scenario remained possible, though mutually exclusive. And so the international community lived within contradiction, acknowledging that the most technologically traceable era in history had produced the most untraceable event. There is a certain cruelty in that contradiction. In an earlier century, before global radar and GPS, disappearance was almost the expected background of long voyages. Ships could vanish into storms and leave legends instead of timelines. Sailors did not expect answers, only hoped not to be among those lost. But in the modern world, the expectation is opposite. Families are told from the first that aviation is nearly perfect, tracked constantly, and that accidents leave trails leading toward prevention. To suddenly find themselves facing the same kind of blank unknowability as mariners in the age of sail was a brutal inversion of the assurances they trusted. Their grief collided with a sense of betrayal, not only by accident but by progress itself. In this, MH370 belongs to a lineage of mysteries stretching back decades, where technology falters against the sheer contingency of reality. EgyptAir Flight 990 plunged into the Atlantic in 1999, leaving discordant explanations between investigators across two nations, each insisting their account was correct. Was it deliberate human action or mechanical collapse? No consensus ever formed, which means relatives of that flight live, too, with the burden of two simultaneous truths. They cannot reconcile, cannot unite, because the official word itself is split. The silence of unknowing is matched, in this case, by the clamor of opposing theories. Elsewhere, in 2005, Alios Airways 522 drifted silently, uncommunicative, flying its scheduled path while those inside were disabled by pressurization failure. Like a flying tomb, the plane continued on autopilot, climbing into emptiness, while passengers and crew lost consciousness one by one. When fuel finally exhausted, the jet fell into mountains near Athens. Later investigators pieced together the sequence, but the image haunts a plane crossing skies in broad daylight, passengers visible through windows, alive but unresponsive, until total silence ended only in flame. Here, the world was not deprived of physical wreckage, but it was deprived of comfort. Understanding what happened did not reduce the horror of the silent drift, the ghost flight, the human unawareness as time unspooled toward inevitable impact. There is a particular category of nightmares that aviation mysteries evoke. The feared crash into storms is violent but finite, it is a terror completed, however brutal. But the unresolved or the prolonged introduce another cruelty, the cruelty of imagination. Human imagination fills the space where facts do not tread, and imagination does not know mercy. Did passengers know they were lost over the Indian Ocean? Did they hear the engines throttling down into silence? Did they feel sudden pressure changes? Were they struck by sudden unconsciousness through decompression, slipping in seconds without awareness, or were they alert long enough to sense despair? Each possibility writes its script across the mind of someone waiting for answers, and without official closure, every script competes in their dreams. Searchers, too, are injured by this burden. To scour an ocean for years, to see only profiles of seabeds and signals of marine formations and never the silhouette of a plane, can fracture faith. Many of those who worked on MH370 spent careers in naval survey, in satellite imagery, in aeronautics. Yet they recall this search as something alive, as if the ocean itself conspired against them. Engineers described the sonar maps as immense forests of emptiness. Analysts compared the data to static, endless static, where perhaps a signal was buried but refused to surface. In such conditions, even the most disciplined scientist begins to weave anthropomorphic thoughts: the ocean is withholding, the mystery resists, fate enjoys its own concealment. Of course, logic denies such thoughts, but in long nights on ships, staring at blank screens, the temptation to whisper these almost mythic explanations grows strong. And indeed, the human impulse to mythologize is unavoidable. Flight 19's disappearance in 1945 fed directly into the modern myth of the Bermuda Triangle, where uncountable vessels supposedly vanish by abnormal forces. Rational voices remind us most accidents there arise from storms, human error, and ordinary mechanical limitations. Yet the myth persists, because myth offers a narrative arc whereas silence does not. In the same way, MH370 has attracted layers of myth, from conspiracies about secret bases to theories of extraterrestrial abduction. Absurd in their details, perhaps, but deeply human in their necessity. Because within silence, we require story. A cruel truth is that sometimes myth consoles better than no answer at all. Still, professionals resist myth, clinging to methods even when methods announce their failure. Aviation investigators must document, must conclude, must declare probable cause in final reports. Their discipline runs on that ritual. But occasionally, as with MH370, the ritual falters. How to write a document that acknowledges the most extensive search in history but ends with nothing beyond theories? To write such words is to stare at the limit of empiricism, to admit that today, in this age of satellites, sensors, artificial intelligence, engines tracked by maintenance logs down to the bolt, we nonetheless can lose an entire jetliner as completely as if it were swallowed centuries ago by fog. Such mysteries resonate not only because of loss but because they strike the very heart of modern identity. We define our era by mastery of communication, of monitoring, of predicting through data. An airplane's vanishing is an insult to that self-image, a reminder that control is still partial, still fragile. It says, in Silent Thunder, that nature and chance contain pockets where our surveillance and science bend and fail. That insult is oddly timeless, reminding us of earlier ages where the sea was feared not only as water but as an abyss into which stories dropped and never rose. And thus the narrative loops, airplanes vanish, searches extend, scientists press against mystery, families grieve, and culture writes myths to survive the unbearable ambiguities. Each case asks, how much do we truly know? How much safety can we truly guarantee? When a plane is missing, wagons of the modern world halt, society stares at screens hunting clues, and voices from every corner swell with speculation. Until the final answer, the voice of the vanished continues, echoing over oceans, echoing inward, merging with dreams. So now, as the night deepens and your breathing slows, let the images of these mysteries drift across your thoughts. See the radar screens blinking with dots traced in green, then the sudden empty gap where once a symbol hovered. See the ships crawling slowly across vast black oceans, their lights reflected in waves far away from shore. Picture investigators in sterile rooms, surrounding maps and fragments, translating silence into paragraphs that never satisfy. And picture, most of all, the sky itself, wide, timeless, neither cruel nor kind, keeping its secrets with effortless patience. Because here, above us, alongside us, there exists always the chance of disappearance, the persistence of mystery, and the possibility that some stories, like Flight MH370, will haunt us not because they were extraordinary, but because they remind us how fragile even the ordinary can be. There comes a stage in the telling of these mysteries when the investigation itself becomes as fascinating as the disappearance. The technicians who enter this world of unanswered questions are not dreamers or folklorists. They are engineers, analysts, and aviators, people trained to dismiss superstition and to search for mechanical truth. Their language is full of terms like airspeed indicator, angle of attack, hydraulic failure, autopilot logic, and decompression event. They enter the mystery expecting that equations and calculations will lead to clarity. But even for them, it is not always clarity that arrives. Sometimes the data collides with gaps too wide to fill, and math becomes conjecture. Sometimes the patient laying down of known facts builds only the outline of a shadow, leaving the shape within that outline unimaginable. Consider how investigators approach any missing aircraft. The first priority is to mark the last known point, the last solid fact in time and space. From there they stretch outward, drawing arcs of possibility that cover zones where the aircraft might have traveled given its fuel and speed. They pull weather records from satellites, radar signatures from military stations, and communication logs from transmission towers. They call upon oceanographers to model currents, physicists to estimate descent rates, engineers to interpret fragments recovered months later on distant shores. Each discipline contributes a shard, and investigators try to fit them into a mosaic. At times, patterns emerge. More often, the shards refuse to combine neatly. And in the case of MH370, the shard count was so low, the gaps between them so daunting, that the picture remained an unfinished labyrinth, taunting those who bent over it. This frustration is chronicled in quiet testimonies from those who searched. Ship captains who spent years drifting across desolate quadrants of the ocean spoke of how the effort became almost existential. Each day brought fresh sonar recordings, and each night reviewed them, eliminating another 1,000 square kilometers from the sphere of uncertainty but finding nothing. Such progress, by subtraction alone, began to feel absurd, to declare discovery merely by what was not. The ocean's floor, newly mapped, was full of chasms and ridges that easily hid the outlines of a wreck. They spoke of searching for a single metal figure the length of a football field in an abyss large enough to drown continents. Scale alone transformed probability into futility. Yet they pressed on because to stop searching felt like surrender, and surrender meant admitting humanity had reached its limits too soon. The work on MH370 reshaped how the world imagines oceans and accidents. Centuries ago, oceans were called cruel because they swallowed sailors. Today, we saw how they could also swallow evidence even of machines that belonged to modernity. To many, the Indian Ocean became a character in the narrative itself, not merely a backdrop. Its silence seemed to expand outward, engulfing families waiting in airports, analysts writing reports, and entire nations who convened committees but achieved nothing final. When the official investigations paused, the wounds felt deeper, for the silence had become institutional. Not only had the sky and sea swallowed the truth, but so had bureaucracy, time, and fatigue. And yet, MH370 was not unique in pressing humanity against this border between fact and emptiness. Air France Flight 447 had demonstrated how long silence can dominate, how families could live for years without confirmation, until technology advanced enough to pull recorders from abyssal depth. Japan Airlines Flight 1628, in 1986, did not vanish but underwent a strange encounter in Alaskan skies, its crew reporting enormous unexplained lights, a sighting that stirred decades of speculation about whether pilots can ever fully trust their perceptions during long, isolated night flights. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 in 1972, which crashed in the Everglades, left behind wreckage and explanation, but also became fertile soil for ghost stories told by surviving employees. The pattern grows clear. Aviation does not only produce accidents but produces myths, legends, riddles that latch onto imagination. And sometimes a solved case still leaves behind tendrils of mystery that cling beyond the boundaries of logic. Every investigator must wrestle with this. The official position requires restraint. To write a report demands rejecting myth, discarding folklore, sticking to evidence. But to live with these accidents personally sometimes invites a deeper relationship with mystery, for the unending questions pursue them through sleepless nights. Picture the engineer who stares at a recovered wing fragment, calculating the forces that broke it, then drifting to bed with unanswered doubts still gnawing. Picture the controller who replayed tapes in search of background noise that might clarify what happened. These are not faceless professions, they are human beings who carried the burden of the unsolved, who carried fragments of silence into every room they entered. Silence is the most haunting character in these mysteries. For the families, silence stretches into rituals of grief without a body. They hold memorials around blank coffins or empty urns, planting flowers upon earth that contains no remains. They perform ceremonies without a resting place, their words addressed to waves that will never return anyone. Psychologists explain that unresolved grief is cruelest harder than grief after certainty because the mind clings to a little thread of maybe, a spark that imagines return. And that spark fights against the darker imagination. It keeps one part of the heart hoping, even as the rational mind whispers that there is no hope. Each anniversary, the spark rekindles, convincing people to attend new memorials or to ask once more for a resumed search. The public, too, becomes entangled in these mysteries. When MH370 dominated headlines, it was not simply because of the scale of loss. It was also because disappearance taps into something primal. Human beings have always gathered to tell stories about vanishings, villages gone without trace, ships ghosting across horizons, travelers stepping away never to return. In each culture, disappearance becomes myth because it opens space where imagination cannot rest. Today's aviation mysteries carry the same function. They remind the public not only of fragile mortality but also of the limits of command over the world. For a society that prides itself on control, mystery is intolerable. This is why speculation becomes feverish, why media cycles spin with theories, each promising to heal the wound of silence with explanation, even if poorly supported. And, of course, within silence there is always suspicion. The less evidence there is, the more the mind suspects. Could governments hold secrets? Could conspiracies cloak reality? Did unknown technologies intervene? Logic may reject these, but in the absence of closure they grow naturally, filling gaps like weeds in an untended field. MH370 became a canvas for such theories, painted by the imaginations of millions. For the families, these theories became both torment and fuel, torment when false hopes arose, but fuel when each theory suggested there might still be more to learn. Suspicion may not soothe, but it keeps grief from stagnation. Across the years, one notices repetition. The pattern of disappearance, futile search, speculative theory, unhealed grief. EgyptAir 990 repeats elements present later in MH370. Flight 19 repeats mythic notes resonant in Bermuda Triangle tales. The Alios ghost flight repeats the cruelty of prolonged consciousness fading into inevitable doom. Eastern Airlines for 01 repeats the theme of hauntings, where even explained crashes produce superstitions among survivors. Each contributes to a larger human story, one in which certainty is scarcer than we wish, and in which even in modern ages we face mysteries echoing back to ancient fears. Think of it tonight as you rest. Imagine those long corridors of airports, their boards filled with arrivals and departures glowing in steady light. In one corner, a word appears, delayed. Hours later, it changes, missing. That word is small, almost casual, but for hundreds of waiting relatives, it detonates entire worlds. Missing is different from lost. Missing lights up every corridor of possibility, every range from eventual return alive to permanent never. Families arrive at hotels, clutching belongings, waiting day after day for announcements that slide from urgent to resigned. The noise of searching fleets echoes across their television screens, waves traced by satellites that cannot quite find their object. Sleeping in foreign hotels, they dream of the absent plane, sometimes in hope, sometimes in horrid imaginations of final minutes. What remains with us when thinking about these disasters is not only the technical puzzle but the human resonance. We are creatures who fear silence, who fear the absence of explanation, and we fill that absence with restless stories. But there is also a dignity inside the silence, a reminder that we cannot yet master every dimension of our universe. Planes fly vast distances across skies and oceans, and yes, most succeed unremarkably. but sometimes one disappears into a corridor where human science has not yet reached, and in that corridor the story pauses indefinitely. The unresolved aviation disasters are therefore paradoxes, as modern as satellites yet as ancient as legends. They remind passengers, families, and nations alike that progress does not erase mystery. Every time a plane departs, we trust the laws of engineering, the training of pilots, the global web of communication. That trust is mostly justified. But in rare cases, when silence descends and never lifts, that trust cracks, showing the abyss it covers has not vanished, it only waits, occasionally swallowing one flight to remind us of its patience. And so, as your eyes close to the rhythm of this narration, hold gently the image of skies that are both pathways and labyrinths, oceans that are both surfaces and abysses. Hear the hum of engines, the soft chatter of crew, the calm voice of a pilot reporting altitude before all vanishes, leaving airwaves silent, radars empty, and questions unfulfilled. Understand that in these enduring silences lives a truth not of fear but of perspective. We are still wanderers, still not fully masters, still vulnerable to the vastness around us. That lesson echoes through every disappearance. It is the quiet music of aviation's most mysterious disasters. The longer one lingers on the history of unsolved aviation disasters, the more the stories begin to merge into an echo that resonates across decades. Each case seems unique on the surface, shaped by its own circumstances, time, and place, but when woven together they compose a larger pattern of human vulnerability in the skies. That pattern is not defined by violence or certainty, but by the soft, enduring weight of what is never resolved. These stories pull us into their gravitational field slowly, compelling us to ask again and again the same unsolvable questions. And the more years pass, the more their unanswered silence begins to feel like a second atmosphere surrounding the history of flight itself. The haunting truth for investigators is that aviation, despite every advance, cannot completely conquer disappearance. For every plane tracked instantly by satellite, there remains the possibility of one plane slipping between signals. For every cockpit voice recorded and later decoded, there remains one cockpit lost forever, its words silent against black boxes swallowed by oceans. Aviation is defined by its extraordinary safety statistics, yet these few anomalies take root in the imagination much stronger than the tens of thousands of flights that land safely every day. Because human beings are not comforted only by safety percentages. We live through stories, and the story of disappearance will always outshine the story of safe arrival. To understand how these disappearances press upon world memory, let us drift back in time toward the case of Flight 19. It is evening on December 5, 1945, and 14 airmen depart Florida on a routine training mission. The planes are Grumman Avengers, reliable torpedo bombers from the Second World War. Their leader is experienced, his men young. At first, everything proceeds as it should. But then the voices on radio channels begin to betray unease. The commander's compass is behaving strangely, pointing in conflicting directions, and he soon declares he no longer knows where they are. Weather is worsening, daylight fading. The pilots sound disoriented. Radio logs capture fragments of confusion. Then the voices vanish. An hour turns to 2. Search planes are dispatched, and one of them, a rescue aircraft with 13 crew members aboard, also disappears, presumed to have exploded mid-air or fallen into the sea. For days, an immense operation scours the waters and coasts. Wreckage is not found. Reports conclude in phrases like "lost without trace." The entire squadron dissolves into the eternity of folklore. The Bermuda Triangle myth accelerates around cases like this. Rational explanations exist: navigational disorientation, a leader who mistakenly believed he had reversed course, planes running out of fuel. Yet in the absence of wreckage, rational explanations feel weak. More powerful are the irrational ones: strange magnetic anomalies in the region, vortexes pulling aircraft into another dimension, even whispers of extraterrestrial abduction. These myths remain attractive because they are stronger narratives than we cannot know. And so Flight 19 stands not merely as a lost patrol but as the cradle of a myth that continues decades later. The dynamic between reasonable investigation and shadow myths repeats in most cases. When EgyptAir 990 fell from the sky in 1999, radar tracked its sudden dive toward the ocean. There was wreckage, there were voice recordings, there was some data. And yet, no unity of explanation could be shaped. The United States investigators claimed the co-pilot deliberately pushed the plane into descent, overriding attempts to recover, an act of suicide with mouse consequences. Egyptian authorities rejected this conclusion, insisting the explanations ignored possible mechanical failure. Each side stood its ground. The final result was not a unified narrative, but two stories existing side by side, mutually exclusive, never reconciled. To this day, families and onlookers remain divided, their trust pinned on either technical malfunction or human intention. In either case, the tragedy is immense, but the ambiguity carries a peculiar sting. Truth fractured across borders tends never to repair. Sometimes the mystery lies not in total absence nor in contested interpretations, but in eerie details that resist dismissal. The Alios Airways 522 incident comes to mind. Here, we know what happened: improper pressurization settings left the cabin with insufficient oxygen. Crew and passengers lost consciousness. The plane drifted under autopilot, broadcasting no messages, flying like a ghost across clear skies. Fighter jets sent to intercept reported seeing passengers slumped unmoving in their seats, one figure in the cockpit barely responsive until fuel starvation brought the final descent. The cause was clear and undeniable, yet the horror did not fade simply because the puzzle was solved. On the contrary, it grew more haunting, for the image of an aircraft continuing its routine flight without living control spoke to something deeper. It was a metal shell traveling stubbornly forward, a machine that had outlived its human operators, crossing its geography like a phantom. Witnessing an aircraft that still flies while its people are silenced is a sight more haunting than wreckage scattered in the sea. It is no surprise that to this day Alios 522 is remembered under the title The Ghost Plane. In other cases, even when causal chains are finally discovered, they are discovered too late to prevent repetition. Air France for 47 was one such story. For years, families wandered with silence as their only answer. Searchers mapped vast sections of the Atlantic floor, each failure deepening despair. Finally, the flight recorders were retrieved, explaining how sensor blockages confused pilots at the most critical moments, their reactions amplifying the error until catastrophe was unavoidable. The explanation was eventually precise and undeniable. Yet the long silence preceding it had already written its own myth. For that interval of 2 years, the plane was as lost as MH370 would later be, and for 2 years its families bore that mysterious absence. Only afterward did truth slowly dissolve the myth. And the time lag inflicted wounds that even explanation could not heal. The persistence of silence worsens over years. For MH370, as the years extend past a decade, silence grows into permanence. It is no longer the silence of waiting but the silence of history accepted. Every year sees anniversaries where families gather. Candles are lit, names are read, questions whispered again into microphones. Officials arrive with solemn expressions, restating their sympathy but also reasserting their inability to say more. The same ocean maps are shown, the same square kilometers accounted for, the same small fragments displayed. And even as scientists continue to model drift patterns, the probability of finding the main wreckage diminishes. Eventually, the world begins to shift its gaze, not because the story has faded, but because repeated silence becomes unbearable. Media outlets drift to other catastrophes, reporters cover new disasters, leaving the families in solitude with questions never answered. This abandonment by attention is its own form of cruelty. For while journalists speak of moving on, grieving families cannot move on. Their story has no conclusion. Grief requires closure, and closure requires knowledge. Without a body, without a place, without a known cause, grief cannot finish its cycle. And so it becomes like a disease, frozen mid-process, continually inflaming itself through recollection and hope, never healing. Psychologists studying such families have found immense difficulties for survivors, not only emotional but social. Friends and communities tire of supporting grief that never concludes. Marriages break under the strain. Parents age rapidly. Children inherit questions rather than answers. Silence ripples long beyond the accident itself, metastasizing into every surrounding life. For investigators, the haunting operates differently. They are bound by professional ethics, trained to gather, measure, conclude. To leave a report empty of answers feels like betrayal of all they represent. They enter their professions motivated by belief in logic, by the idea that every event has cause, every machine can be explained. And then a case like MH370 deconstructs that belief. They find themselves trapped in years of exhausted searches, writing reports that finally admit probable cause cannot be established. These words are not simply procedure, they are wounds to professional faith. Some investigators never recover. They carry the stress into other cases, doubting their own belief in explanation. Careers are shortened, spirits exhausted, because to fail against silence is to stand unarmed in battle with infinity. When considering aviation's greatest unsolved disasters, it is tempting to focus only on the machines, the routes, the technical failures. But the deeper substance lies not in the machinery but in the humanity. Planes vanish, yes, but it is families, investigators, and entire cultures who carry the haunting. Ghost stories are written because imagination is demanded. Conspiracies arise because suspicion is stronger than nothingness. Rituals continue because otherwise grief cannot breathe. And behind all of this is the reminder that control, even in the most controlled system humanity has ever built, remains fragile. We are children of mystery as much as masters of machine. Now close your eyes and imagine again a night flight, an ordinary cabin, passengers falling asleep under soft light as engines drone. Picture the view from cockpit windows, distant lightning flickering across cloud horizons, stars bright in lunar calm. Imagine how everything feels routine, how nothing warns. Then picture the sudden silence on airwaves, the disappearance from radar, the cabin endlessly lost in its sky. No crash has been witnessed, no wreck has been found. Only silence remains. And that silence grows into legend, into myth, into documentaries like those told here, where quiet narration replaces explanation, where mystery becomes lullaby. It is in this atmosphere that people drift slowly to sleep, not through fear but through recognition of vastness. The world is larger than our explanations. Oceans and skies still hold dominions where human certainty dissolves into wonder. And though these stories haunt with unbearable loss, they also remind that mystery will always walk beside progress. Planes vanish, silence deepens, but the search continues, and in the search itself lies the most human quality of all: persistence against silence, hope against impossibility, memory against time. As the years roll forward, the stories of these missing planes grow quieter in public memory, but for those most bound to them, the silence never fades. Silence is not neutral here. It is alive, insistent, whispering both to bereaved families and to the minds of investigators that they still do not know. And when something is unknown long enough, it takes on new qualities. It is no longer merely technical, no longer a matter of radar errors or fuel exhaustion. It becomes a presence, something that surrounds the very idea of flight, something that makes even the ordinary journey into a reminder that mystery could always return. It lingers in the nervous glance of a passenger gripping the armrest. It lingers in the speculation of a newsreader when the next turbulent event strikes. It lingers in the documentaries we tell, in narratives whispered to lull people into reflection, but also as a way of warding off the terror of never knowing. MH370 is the defining mystery of our century, but it exists within a lineage of strange disappearances and incomplete resolutions. That lineage arcs like a constellation across aviation history. EgyptAir 990, Flight 19, Alios 522, Air France for 47. Together they remind us that the sky is not only an arc of freedom and connection, but also an abyss of enigmas. And still, around them float other shadows, incidents less known, less chronicled, but equally potent in feeding this mythology that the air and sea conspire against human certainty. For every headline case, there are dozens where records resist clarity, where probable causes dissolve under scrutiny, where final reports do not satisfy. Aviation disasters without closure create scars deeper than ordinary accidents. Closure, even when stained with pain, brings direction. It allows new laws, adjusted procedures, improved logos of safety that tell the living we have learned. An unsolved case tells us that maybe nothing has been learned at all, or worse, that maybe the lesson is hidden, but we cannot yet see it. For the engineers, this is intolerable. They measure, they test, they model in simulators late at night. They replay flight data again and again, hunting small signals that a different analyst may have overlooked. They imagine new flight paths in software, project possible angles of descent, compare debris drift to oceanographic patterns. Yet none of these answers has ever been final for certain mysteries. The wreckage resists discovery. The black box remains in silence. A simulation is only a shadow, not a truth. For the families, the state of being unsolved is cruelty without end. Each time news flashes with another story, a fisherman pulling strange metal ashore, a satellite capturing a blurred shimmer on waves, another government commissioning yet another search vessel, their wrenching hope returns. And each time results fail again, their grief bursts anew, like wounds reopening. Hope keeps them alive, but hope also tortures them, because the hope they cling to is always undone. Some choose to accept silence as its own conclusion. Others refuse, insisting a search must restart. These divisions fracture families, communities, entire networks of those grieving together. Grief without burial is like fire without ashes, it keeps smoldering forever. The public, listening from afar, often experiences another side of the mystery. To them, these disappearances are reminders of fragility. They sit in their seats on ordinary flights, watching flight attendants going through safety routines, and although they smile and glance at one another, part of them whispers inwardly, "What if tonight is the night something vanishes?" Every mystery becomes a presence in the cabin, invisible but quietly heavy. The poems and films and documentaries that proliferate are not merely for fascination, they are ways of digesting fear, taming it, making it soft enough to let us keep flying. Flight 19 remains a case where technical explanations never overcame myth. If the plane simply disoriented, why no wreckage despite shallow seas? If their fuel ran out, where are the remains? Legends insist that the triangle of ocean swallows whatever crosses. Rationalist voices say this is superstition disguising human error. Yet the legend outlived the rational analysis. And that is always the danger when mysteries are left unsolved. Legends possess greater power in the public imagination than reports. In time, even MH370 may slip the boundaries of technical discourse entirely, remembered not as a case with radar logs and Inmarsat data points, but simply the plane that disappeared where no explanation sufficed. Other mysteries echo beyond simple disappearance and creep into territory of philosophy. One such example, often whispered in aviation circles, is the case of ghost flights incidents where pilots and crew become incapacitated and the plane itself continues onward. Alios 522 is the starkest, a flight of unconscious passengers drifting toward its destruction. Yet other small aircraft have done the same, losing pilots to hypoxia at high altitudes, continuing for hundreds of miles until fuel dwindled. For observers on the ground, seeing such planes overhead, the image abolishes the assumed presence of control. It suggests the machine does not need us to continue its path, we become only cargo in a vessel indifferent to our awareness. And when such planes vanish finally at sea or shatter into uninhabited terrain, the mystery leaves not only grief but an unsettling suggestion: in some ways, planes are larger than us, and perhaps more faithful to their courses than the fallible hands guiding them. Other mysteries sprout from disagreement. EgyptAir 990 revealed the geopolitical fracture when nations disagree on the very nature of a disaster. Was it human will or mechanical failure? When no side concedes, both truths inhabit space simultaneously. Families torn between truths walk with uncertainty heavier than any single explanation would impose. In their dreams, sometimes it was machines, sometimes it was suicide, both unbearable in different ways. Investigators, forced to end reports, did so without unity, drawing a bleak portrait of how silence sometimes breeds not myth but conflict. And here, the haunting comes less from invisibility than from irreconcilable multiplicity. Even when truth eventually arrives, as in the Air France for 47 case, what lingers is the darkness of waiting. For 2 full years, voices speculated endlessly. 2 years of families haunted by silence, imagining storms, hijacking, sabotage. By the time the black boxes surfaced, their grief had already solidified around multiple imagined stories. When the truth of instrument failure and confusing pilot control inputs was uncovered, it closed one corridor of imagination but did not dissolve the scars left by years of uncertainty. Time itself had already damaged them. This is another cruelty of silence. Even when solved later, silence has already left its mark, and resolution is never as healing as it should have been at first. In every unsolved case lies the frightening reminder that the most critical evidence rests deep within oceans. The sea is as much a participant in these mysteries as the machine or the human pilot. It is the sea that swallows signals, crushes wreckage beyond recognition, carries fragments thousands of kilometers from their origin. To hunt a plane at the bottom of the Indian Ocean is closer to exploring outer space than earthly investigation. With pressure enough to collapse submarines and darkness beyond vision, the wreckage lies in terrain where almost nothing else human exists. Searchers and marine scientists whisper privately that perhaps some wrecks are too deep, too broken, too spread for recovery to ever succeed. And so families must live with the quiet knowledge that the graves of their loved ones are out there, guarded by eternal darkness no human gaze will ever penetrate. And then there is the question of intention, the specter of human will. Pure mechanical silence can be accepted, if painfully, as unavoidable accident. But if a crew member guides the plane to silence, if deliberate hands steer toward oblivion, then the mystery turns to another genre. It becomes crime instead of catastrophe. Suspicion of such acts recurs often, though rarely confirmed. An intentional crash is almost worse than the absence of explanation, for it suggests not that nature overwhelmed but that human despair betrayed. This possibility haunts MH370 especially, breeding theories that fracture public opinion. And yet absence ensures that none of these theories can reign definitively, leaving behind only friction, doubt, and unease. Think of investigators after years of effort. They know progress has been historic. Vast undersea regions were mapped for the first time. Technologies of sonar were advanced, computer simulations refined, satellite algorithm analysis improved. These will assist future accidents. And yet, for all their triumphs, the central wound persists. The wreck has not been found, the cause has not been named. One wonders how investigators feel, lying in their bunks, staring at ceilings of ships anchored in steel-grey oceans. One wonders what they whisper to themselves about the plane. Do they still believe discovery will come? Or do they accept silently that maybe this one mystery will always escape them? Either way, they remain haunted. Mysteries are not archives, they are burdens that follow you. Meanwhile, passengers continue to board flights easily. Airports breathe thousands of people through security lines. Boarding passes scan, children cry, announcements echo. Every day, billions of flight hours proceed without event. A passenger sips coffee, a business traveler checks emails, a family takes their first vacation abroad. All statistics declare the sky nearly perfect in safety. But to those who remember MH370, Flight 19, Air France for 47, Alios 522, EgyptAir 990, and the others, there is always another layer hovering. For hidden behind the miracle of aviation is a fragile shadow where disappearance waits, rare but real. And in that shadow we glimpse our larger human truth. We can make machines with wings and power, but we cannot abolish uncertainty. Tonight, as you listen, let your mind drift far above oceans. Imagine the view from 36,000 feet, stars above, endless horizon below. Imagine the quiet in a darkened cabin, passengers reclining under thin blankets, the drone of engines a lullaby. Picture the cockpit, numbers scrolling across green displays, pilots watching calmly. For hours all is peace. Then imagine the silence when one simple moment fails to arrive. The air traffic controller calls, and there is no answer. A dot vanishes on the screen. Controllers lean closer, waiting for it to blink again, but it never does. Hours turn into days, days to weeks, weeks to years. Families gather, investigators search, oceans are mapped, myths are rewritten, and still the dot has not returned. This is the silence we live with, this strange reminder that in modernity's most advanced machine the possibility of vanishing has not been erased. And as that truth seeps in, the silence itself becomes something like a lullaby. Not peaceful, not gentle, but a slow acceptance that mystery shares our lives whether we wish it or not. The skies carry us, the machines protect us, the crews guide us, but fate always keeps its own counsel. Each unsolved case becomes a star in the dark firmament of aviation history. And so as you drift toward rest, let the whisper of engines and the thought of distance comfort you. The mysteries remain. They will always remain. But in their haunting silence lies also a story of persistence, of humanity never ceasing to ask, never ceasing to search, never ceasing to remember those who disappeared into skies and seas but never into nothing. As the mysteries accumulate one after another, their shadows do not fade, they overlap and interlock, building a fabric of uncertainties that stretches across the sky whenever we look upward. The longer one studies them, the more it feels as though aviation is divided into two histories. One is visible, clear, statistical, routes flown safely, millions of passengers carried without harm, the numbers that tell the story of triumph. The other is invisible, woven from anomalies, fragments, absences, ghosts, and silences. The unseen history resists metrics. It does not yield conclusions but stands as an unfinished conversation, one where the last words have been cut off mid-sentence. In the quiet of night, it is always this second history that returns to whisper over and over. When tracing the thread of disasters unsolved, what becomes apparent is that time itself reshapes them. In the moment of disappearance, there is chaos, an urgency to respond, people mobilizing, ships leaving port, satellites redirected, analysts flooding into command centers. Days later, after no resolution, urgency shifts to cautious endurance. Weeks stretch into months, the storm of voices fades, and what remains is not chaos but a haunting trance, as if reality has folded around an absence that society slowly learns to carry. Years later, the incidents are remembered not as breaking news but as mythic voids, ghosts in the civilizational record. When people speak of Flight 19, they do not recount data, they recount the way a squadron of planes vanished into night, as though the ocean were a mouth. When they speak of MH370, they do not remember transponder codes or radar pulses, they remember a plane stepping into the dark and never emerging. Facts dissolve, only the silence persists. And for those who lived inside the silence of these disasters, time moves differently. Families have no grave but instead live with anniversaries that arrive like storms. Every new year is not a celebration but a reminder, it has been one more cycle around the calendar without answers. Each anniversary ceremony repeats the same words, the same candles, the same photographs of faces long lost. The gatherings are never truly healing, they are rehearsals of unresolved pain. And unlike ordinary grief, which unfolds over time like a story that, however tragic, proceeds toward acceptance, this grief stops mid-page, leaving families pacing over the same sentences endlessly. Some find faith in ritual, others in voyages to the coastlines where the ocean stares back at them. Some cannot endure and fade into bitterness, speaking less often, carrying their loss privately. But none are truly able to escape, because the absence refuses to release them. Investigators, too, cannot shed the shadows. They move on to other cases, serve government agencies, lecture in classrooms, sit on panels. But always, at the edges of their careers, remains the file that was never closed properly. They remember the sonar maps, the reckless reports, the moment they knew they had to write the phrase "probable cause cannot be determined." No other phrase in their field stings so much. It is professional despair codified into words. And although they speak firmly in public, privately they may confess what haunts them most, the knowledge that somewhere down there beneath layers of ocean, within folded geology, there is still an intact black box, still recording, still waiting, still capable even years later of telling the truth if only it could be heard. They know that somewhere, silence is not total. The truth exists, whispering inside corroded metal sealed in darkness. It is perhaps that knowledge, more than anything else, that keeps them awake at night. And for humanity more broadly, every disappearance extends a shadow of imagination. Because silence is not empty. It is the most fertile ground for imagination, and human imagination loves to plant terrible seeds. In the absence of data, conspiracies multiply. Myths blossom. Some speak of hidden islands where planes are kept. Others whisper of espionage operations and cover-ups. Some speak of unnatural phenomena, time slips, dimensional tears, alien forces. None of it grounded, all of it imaginative. Yet these imaginations are adored because they turn despair into story. If there is a story, then the silence feels less unbearable. If one can believe something happened even if it is unimaginable, it is better in a way than believing absolutely nothing was revealed. This is why silence almost always produces myth. Humans cannot walk across blank pages, they must fill them. But myths, while soothing, can also wound. Families must perpetually navigate the collision between official restraint and public conspiracy. A mother sits holding her daughter's photograph, having told the child's story hundreds of times. Beside her, a stranger online insists the plane was hijacked by governments or captured by forces beyond Earth. The mother's grief is blurred, twisted, transformed into spectacle. Every false theory carries not only hope but insult, every stranger's certainty disrespects the agony of not knowing. And yet the mother, like many, sometimes clings privately to even impossible explanations, because having something to imagine is easier than acknowledging silence outright. Such internal conflict deepens the wound endlessly. When one considers the entire gallery of mysteries, certain images recur as if carved into the collective dream. A dot vanishing from radar. A final radio transmission calm and ordinary. A stretch of sea with no floating fragments. Coastlines where driftwood carries names scratched into wreckage. Cockpits glowing with numbers right until the moment no numbers arrive. Governments convening to explain ignorance rather than knowledge. Families holding vigils with candles that flicker but do not enlighten. Each of these images belongs not only to MH370 or to Flight 19 or to EgyptAir 990, they belong to all of them, to the category of the unsolved, the unfinished, the insoluble. They compose a single shadow, timeless and borderless. And here, inevitably, arises the question, what does all of this mean, beyond the technical sphere, beyond aviation? What does it reveal about existence itself? In each disappearance lies the reminder that we live within limits. We create technologies of astonishing power. We imagine our control extends across sky and ocean. We promise ourselves that we can account for everything. Yet a single flight, a single twist in the dark, defeats us. Where did MH370 go? No one knows. What became of Flight 19? No one knows. At a certain point, we must admit that knowledge is not infinite, that some truths lie beyond reach not only for now but perhaps for all time. And in this admission comes, strangely, a kind of humility. These mysteries, haunting though they are, remind us that mystery itself will never be abolished. Mystery may be feared, but it is also what renders our lives profound. For those who cannot accept ambiguity, investigation becomes an obsession. In chat forums, private groups, homemade documentaries, thousands of amateurs replay scenarios endlessly. They build their own simulations, collect satellite photographs, track ocean current data. Many dedicate years of their lives, unpaid, searching for evidence that governments abandoned. Some families join them, clasping to the energy of amateurs who, unlike officials, refuse to give up. Yet this energy often spirals into battles, accusations, divisions, bitter debates dividing those who should share solidarity. Silence fractures people as much as it binds them. Where there is no truth, competing truths multiply, each defended with ferocity. And as years pass, these competing truths crystallize, ensuring the case is never only unsolved but also eternally contested. The cruel irony is that technology, for all its power, sometimes worsens the silence. We live in an age where satellites map every corner of Earth, where phones in our pockets record our locations, where aircraft constantly communicate with ground networks. And yet here, in the case of unsolved flights, even all this failed. The public, hearing this, feels betrayed by technology itself. If we can photograph Mars in detail, why not locate a Boeing on our own planet? No answer sufficiently satisfies. And so the absence feels like fraud, as though truth were stolen rather than merely hidden. Progress collapses, trust erodes, and silence grows heavier still. Consider again the sea. It swallows not with intent but with indifference. In its depths lie more remains than we will ever tally. Planes, ships, fragments of societies ancient and modern, all rest where darkness is constant. To the sea, a jetliner is nothing exceptional. It is merely another shape falling, breaking, scattering. To us, however, each vanishing is unbearable because it resists the closure we depend upon. We may map the ocean, chart the stars, calculate weather, but death without explanation terrifies more than storm itself. Drowning frightens less than not knowing how we drowned. Disappearance frightens more than impact. So remember this as you let your eyes rest. These accounts are not written to frighten, but to accompany you into the recognition that even in our advanced world, there will always be mysteries. Each disappearance is an echo, a voice cut off mid-sentence that continues to resonate across families, investigators, and cultures. It is echoed through anniversaries, through fragments washed ashore, through debates that never conclude, through documentaries like this one, whispered softly at night while others drift into sleep. Closure may never come. Perhaps closure is not what these mysteries are meant to provide. Perhaps their role is to remind us of the vastness we still cannot control, of the silence that will always remain part of the human story. In this sense, the most mysterious aviation disasters do not belong only to aviation. They belong to the human encounter with the incomprehensible. They are monuments of absence, memorials not of wreckage but of silence itself. When a plane vanishes, something larger than aviation vanishes with it, the illusion that we can always know, always explain, always discover. What remains instead is humility, the recognition that there are limits at which even our greatest machines, our brightest investigators, our most determined families, must bow. That humility, though painful, is a kind of truth. And as you drift deeper into sleep, you may also drift deeper into this recognition. That silence is not only cruel but also infinite. That the ocean always waits, that the sky always hides, that some stories will never conclude. Yet within humanity always remains the refusal to forget, the refusal to let the silence win completely. Candles are lit each year. Names are read aloud. Search vessels depart again despite failures. Private individuals watch screens for anomalies. Investigators replay data even after retirement. Families remember loved ones and speak their names. This persistence is the answer to silence. Silence may never reveal the missing machine, but humanity refuses to let silence erase memory. And so long as memory endures, the disappeared are not entirely gone. Close your eyes now and imagine the final image. A plane flying at night, a simple ordinary journey across the air. Those inside calm, unaware. Outside, the endless ocean. Then the inexplicable turn, the vanishing, the silence. Radar screen searching. Families waiting. Investigators straining. Oceans unbroken. Years passing. Myths forming. Candles flickering. And still the mystery unsolved. This is how the great aviation enigmas live not only in the sky or sea but inside us, as part of how we dream, how we fear, how we remember, and how we accept that not everything can be explained. In the silence, a strange lullaby plays, reminding us that some truths belong only to the deep, never to human grasp, always to the dark beyond the horizon where one flight departed and never arrived. What lingers after years of silence is not only the memory of a vanished plane, but the slow transformation in the way we think about flight itself. People continue to board without hesitation, continue to trust routes drawn by invisible maps across the air, but in the background lives a quiet awareness that sometimes, not often but sometimes, flights step into absence. This awareness does not show itself in daily life. It waits. It waits in the first hint of turbulence, in the pause before a pilot's announcement, in that moment when a passenger looks out into endless sky and ocean and realizes how little separates trust from uncertainty. Aviation thrives on confidence, but mystery burrows just beneath it. The paradox is not destructive, rather, it defines the balance by which aviation and its illusions continue. The larger truth is that absence reveals more about us than presence. Wreckage explains, voices close stories, fragments bring autopsies. But absence draws out imagination, suspicion, grief, persistence, and endless human narratives. It is in absence that families cry out, where journalists stretch words, where investigators sit sleepless. It is in absence that cultures build myths about triangles and cursed waters and conspiracies. It is absence that proves most powerful, that resists burial by fact. When the object is absent, the imagination will never stop moving. That is why the deepest mysteries never cease to expand, In every room where relatives gather, silence stalks the air. Families aged by waiting tell the same histories of their loved ones, describing simple details, a favorite meal, a sentence spoken before leaving for the airport, the clothes they chose to wear that day. These stories acquire sacred value because they are all that remain. If no wreckage arrives, if no voices return, then memory must stand in place of remains. Families hold photographs like relics, read aloud messages last sent from phones, replay voicemails again and again until the sound is frayed by grief. Their mourning becomes ritualized, each anniversary etched into calendars not as a day of death but as a day of refusal to accept silence as final. Yet even rituals grow heavy. Some cannot endure repeating them each year. They withdraw from public vigils, they dim their voices, they let silence win for a while. But it is never complete surrender. In small gestures, lighting a candle privately at a kitchen table, tracing initials in notebooks, raising a toast quietly, they keep memory alive. Silence may shrink memory into smaller shapes, but it never erases it fully. And this persistence, fragile though it may appear, is a kind of resistance against the abyss. It ensures disappearance is never absolute. Investigators, in their own way, perform similar rituals. Many move on to other careers, teaching, consulting, writing papers. But inside them, the missing case remains like unfinished work, the story they will tell in cautious sentences even decades later: we tried, but nothing more could be found. Some continue research on their own, not as duty but as compulsion. They study drift models for oceans, adjust parameters in new software, or join online forums under anonymity, offering insights quietly. The case is personal now, not professional. It is no longer about solving aviation but about reconciling their own lives with something they could not explain. Even for nations, silence becomes part of identity. A government that presided over disappearance is marked forever. Malaysia bears MH370 as an unavoidable scar upon modern history. Egypt endured ridicule for 990, debates that never yielded unity. The United States still carries the mythic aura of Flight 19, a chapter that still shapes pop culture references to the Bermuda Triangle. France and Brazil recall the lengthy torment of Air France for 47 before its eventual recovery. These mysteries extend beyond families and officials. They seep into national identity, reminders of failure, of vulnerability, of unresolved collective memory. What deepens the haunting is the knowledge that somewhere in the world at this very moment there are artifacts lying silently: airframes, engines, cockpit recordings waiting in inaccessible terrains. At the bottom of oceans they rest, entire chapters of truth pressed into darkness, unreadable for now. Each recorder is a diary sealed with steel, still intact, still coded with the voices of those final minutes. It is almost unbearable to imagine, truth exists, but out of reach. Knowing it cannot be recovered is like hearing voices behind a wall one cannot break. That dissonance keeps people awake at night, whispering to themselves that someday, perhaps someday, technology will make the wall thinner. Technology, however, mocks as much as it helps. Every year we add satellites, sensors, inferential algorithms of astonishing power. Yet planes still vanish. Every announcement about advanced surveillance is countered silently by the memory that MH370 remains gone. The paradox is cruel. The closer we approach to total awareness, the more horrifying it is when awareness fails. And when it fails, explanation falls not into ignorance as in the past, but into betrayal. People feel tricked, as though promises of safety were illusions. Silence becomes heavier precisely because it contradicts the expectations technology raised. Perhaps this is the final irony: progress makes mysteries worse, not better, for our dismay is sharper against the background of promised certainty. The cultural imagination clings to metaphors to cope. The Bermuda Triangle, once a story about Flight 19 and countless ships, is a myth to soak up anxiety. Some invoke portals, secret bases, extraterrestrial intervention. Debunked and ridiculed, yes, but widely circulated still. And new cases like MH370 feed fresh metaphors. Some imagine hijackers slipping through gaps in surveillance, others imagine clandestine operations, others dream of something supernatural. Myths are never about evidence. They are about the need for narrative where evidence refuses. The persistence of myth is not ignorance, it is survival. Without myth, silence would drive us mad. For those closest to disappearance, however, myth is rarely comforting. Most families crave evidence, even devastating evidence, because at least evidence weighs less than endless suspicion. A black box speaking final words, no matter how tragic, still closes a chapter. Wreckage mapped on screen still anchors mourning. Only silence resists the mourning process. Silence leaves families hovering between positions, between despair and hope, between grief and denial, between acceptance and obsession. It condemns them to linger all at once in contradictory states that never resolve. For them, the haunting is not myth but fractured existence. As time passes, memory itself changes. In the initial years, people remember the missing in vivid detail: their faces, voices, habits. After decades, sharpness dulls, and what remains is the larger story of the disappearance itself. Loved ones slowly blur into the myth. Their individuality sinks beneath the abstraction of the flight. This is another cruelty: the missing become symbols, remembered not for their lives but for their deaths. Entire novels, documentaries, and essays write of MH370, of Flight 19, of EgyptAir 990, and within these stories the individual names rarely appear. They have become crowds, not people. And though memory persists globally, for the families, this transformation cuts deep. Each lost person had a name, a smell, a laugh. To see them replaced by the phrase "the passengers" is its own form of erasure. Yet it is this transformation that secures longevity. Symbols do not die the way individuals do. When aviation mysteries become myths, they outlast decades, re-emerge in new generations, retold for new eras. Flight 19 vanished in 1945, yet children today still hear whispers of the Bermuda Triangle. MH370 will follow the same trajectory. 100 years from now, if wreckage is never found, people will retell it as if it were a ghost story, forgetting the sharp political and technical details, but never forgetting the moment a plane disappeared into nothing. Silence assures eternity. There is also the way these mysteries bleed into literature and cinema and art. They manifest as metaphors in poems, as motifs in novels, as suspense arcs in films. They inspire not just because they are tragic, but because they symbolize the eternal confrontation between knowing and not knowing. Writers seize them to describe lovers lost, cultures forgotten, civilizations vanished. The airplane that never arrived becomes a stand-in for every unfinished story in human life. In this way, aviation mysteries escape aviation altogether. They become carriers for all human uncertainty. And so the stories linger endlessly because their meaning is greater than aviation. The vanishing flight carries with it lessons about existence, about the fragility of perception, about the limits of control, about how small we remain before nature's silence. Planes vanish not to punish, not to mystify on purpose, but because the world is larger than our systems. Accidents, malfunctions, human errors, storms, technical oversights all are simple, mortal causes, but concealment magnifies them into something more profound. The concealment is what we struggle with. It is what fills nights of waiting, what spawns myths, what echoes through decades. It is concealment, more than death itself, that haunts us. When you close your eyes now, imagine a flight through darkness, its cabin dimmed, passengers breathing softly. Outside, the wings flex against cold air. Above, the stars shine indifferently. Everything is ordinary. Now remove the dot from the radar screen. Picture silence on the radio. Stretch the silence into hours, then days, then years. See how ordinary faces dissolve into posters, into names read at vigils, into anniversaries. Watch how fragments wash ashore, small and insufficient. Watch how governments argue and families beg. And then watch how silence returns each time to swallow each progress, until, at last, the story is no longer about the plane but about the silence itself. This is what the greatest aviation mysteries reveal, not simply incidents, but reflections of ourselves staring into absence. We see our fear, our persistence, our need for closure, our inventiveness in the face of unknowable storms. We see that mystery will never depart from human life, not even in our most engineered systems. We see that closure is not always given, that silence is, in some realms, stronger than discovery. And perhaps this recognition does not need to frighten. Perhaps it is a strange comfort, a reminder that in our pursuit of total knowledge, we will always find places that refuse us, places that remain sacred for their unknowable nature. The ocean, the sky, the silence, they keep their secrets. And we, though restless, continue to fly anyway. When a plane disappears without a trace, it disrupts more than just a journey, it ruptures the very fabric of certainty that blankets our modern lives. Flying, for so many, has become ritualized and routine, a seamless thread stitching together the disparate corners of the world. Yet, each disappearance, especially those that resist explanation, reminds us of the abyss lurking just beneath our networks and algorithms. The disappearance shatters illusions of complete control and eternal safety, replacing them with lingering questions, unanswered, haunting, and endlessly replicating themselves across time and memory. In the quiet aftermath of such events, the vast machinery of investigation swings into motion, a ballet of technology and human dedication choreographed by the singular goal of uncovering truth. Air traffic controllers replay minutes, analysts pore over satellite data, engineers scrutinize aircraft design details, divers and vessels scour unknown waters, sometimes in the most inhospitable corners of the globe. Despite these monumental efforts, success often feels tantalizingly out of reach. The sea, expansive and merciless, hides its secrets beneath towering waves and crushing depths, offering only its silence in return. This silence, however, is far from passive. It possesses a resonant quality that penetrates the lives of those connected to the vanished families, investigators, and even the public. Families, wrestling with the unimaginable, oscillate between hope and despair. The absence of tangible closure leaves their grief suspended, caught between memory and forgetfulness. They carry photographs and mementos, clutching these fragile connections to loved ones as if by sheer will to bridge the void. Vigils and anniversaries become sacred rituals, acts of both remembrance and resistance against erasure. Investigators, conditioned to seek answers, find themselves ensnared in paradoxes. Every data point they acquire seems pregnant with possibility, yet the overall mosaic remains incomplete. Fragments that wash ashore are analyzed meticulously, yet they often only deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Time erodes the likelihood of fresh discoveries. With each year passing, odds diminish that any new evidence will emerge. The pressure, the frustration, and the personal investment weigh heavily, creating psychological tolls that ripple between dusk and dawn, long after official investigations conclude. Public fascination with these unresolved mysteries embodies a fundamental human need to comprehend the incomprehensible. Stories of vanished planes seep into culture, morphing into legends and myths. The Bermuda Triangle, once a colloquial reference, now serves as a symbol of inexplicable loss and lurking danger. Modern equivalents evoke conspiracies and secret narratives, creative attempts to impose order upon chaos. Though often dismissed by experts, these narratives persist, for they fill an emotional void left by silence, a reminder that narratives give meaning where empirical facts remain stubbornly silent. Yet, beneath myth and speculation lies a deeper truth about the human condition. These disappearances reveal the limits of knowledge, the fragility of human constructs. Despite the marvel of aviation's technological achievements, the very airspace crisscrossed daily by countless aircraft can still conceal unknowns. The search for vanished flights becomes more than a quest for machines, it is a journey into the fragile boundary separating certainty from mystery. This boundary is not merely intellectual but deeply experimental. For passengers embarking on flights, it is invisible. Cabins shimmer with familiarity, routines unfold, safety procedures practiced and perfected. Yet the stories of loss ripple beneath the surface, quiet awareness of potential fragility. Each routine has been met before by a rupture, the extraordinary silence when a flight ceases to communicate, when it partakes in the vast canvas of the unknown. The ocean, with its vastness and impenetrability, is often the final actor in these dramas of disappearance. Unlike the sky, which we can approximate through radar or satellite, the sea conceals with layers of darkness and crushing pressure. Beneath uncharted depths lie valleys and peaks as complex and mysterious as mountain ranges, formations mapped only as cartographic contours. It is here, in these remote subaqueous canyons, that evidence may forever sleep, just out of human reach. Understanding the ocean's role in these mysteries deepens respect for its power, its indifference, and its capacity to supplant hope with silence. In parallel, the case of MH370 stands as a modern cultural and emotional touchstone. The international scope of the search effort, flooding millions of dollars and scientific resources into the southern Indian Ocean, underscored the unyielding pursuit of answers. Yet, the void left by the aircraft's absence became a collective wound, cutting across borders and filling the global media with ongoing debate. Despite unprecedented technology and cooperation, what remained was a haunting unfinished narrative, a story told in fragments and silence, a gaping hole in the chronicle of human flight. Meanwhile, older tragedies provide a lens through which the evolution of aviation mystery can be traced. The disappearance of Flight 19 during World War II planted seeds of myth which still entwine around the Bermuda Triangle. EgyptAir 990's crash split narratives across geopolitics, fracture lines impossible to reconcile fully. The eerie ghost flight of Alios 522 introduced compelling images of planes operating without human control, flying monuments to tragedy and machine endurance. Air France for 47's long-awaited recovery offered glimpses of relief, but only after years of agonizing speculation. Together these stories form constellations in the night sky of aviation history, each point shimmering with sorrow, questioning, speculation, and mourning. They also forge an unspoken lesson: no matter the era, no matter the technology, the human race will always confront areas of ignorance, and with that ignorance comes fear and fascination. At a deeper level, these mysteries bring philosophical contemplation into everyday life. They remind us that no matter how advanced our machines or how comprehensive our networks, there will always be realms of uncertainty. They invite reflection upon human vulnerability and the inevitable limits of perception. In the vastness of sky and sea, humanity finds itself simultaneously master and supplicant, wielding instruments of immense power yet constrained by forces, natural and perhaps inscrutable, beyond understanding. Families affected by these disappearances face uniquely difficult emotional journeys suspended between grief and hope, mourning and memory, acceptance and denial. Their lives pivot on absence. They live with unanswered calls and unopened doors, in a liminal space where every new search offer revives expectation and every failed expedition revives despair. Their endurance is testament to profound strength, embodying a refusal to let silence become final. For aviation professionals and researchers, these enduring enigmas test not only expertise but spirit and resolve. The impossible task of finding a vanished flight pushes the boundaries of technology and innovation. Sonar technology is developed and refined, satellite data analysis advances. Knowledge about ocean currents, atmospheric conditions, and aircraft behavior grows. Yet with every new tool, the mystery deepens before it recedes. This paradox fuels a relentless cycle of exploration, innovation, hope, and sometimes exhaustion. This cycle perpetuates an enduring human narrative, one not solely about planes lost but about humanity's quest to confront the unknown. It is a narrative of resilience, persistence, and an abiding belief that eventually, patience and ingenuity will prevail. And yet it is also a story about humility, a tacit acceptance that some answers may forever lie beyond reach. From this tension emerges a bittersweet inspiration, the will to search, even knowing some searches may yield no closure. Public fascination with aviation mysteries is a testament to an ancient impulse to make sense of disappearance. The mixture of fear, curiosity, and empathy fuels media, books, documentaries, and discussions across generations. Modern listeners find themselves drawn into narratives where silence speaks louder than sound, where absence haunts louder than presence. It is an empathy with the unknown, with lives paused mid-journey, with stories left incomplete, and with mysteries that refuse resolution. Imaginative speculation flourishes where facts falter. Conspiracy theories, speculative fiction, and alternative narratives spring forth, some fanciful, others more plausible. While experts dismiss many as baseless, their persistence underscores a universal truth: the mind must fill emptiness, narrate uncertainty, and seek closure. These competing narratives become cultural artifacts in their own right, reflecting collective anxieties about control, trust, and vulnerability. The emotional landscape is fraught. Families fiercely guard memories while navigating an often intrusive public discourse rich with competing theories. Within this dynamic lies a paradox where speculation simultaneously offers comfort and compounds pain, blurring boundaries between hope and skepticism. Navigating this terrain demands both ethical respect and empathy, acknowledging the profound grief of those dwelling in silence. The interplay of myth and fact is complex. Myths endure because silence animates them. They serve as coping mechanisms and cultural narratives that persist beyond official investigation timelines. Over time, technical reports and scientific explanations give way to folklore, stories ritualized into collective memory. Aviation disappearances increasingly serve as symbols of mystery, loss, and humanity's frailty before the unknown. Reflecting on these tragedies invites contemplation of broader themes: the nature of memory, the limits of human understanding, and the fragile relationship between life and technology. Each unsolved disappearance is a mirror reflecting vulnerabilities inherent in even our most sophisticated constructs. They remind us that certainty is an illusion that can shatter abruptly. In closing, these mysteries are woven into the fabric of human experience, embodying the tension between certainty and uncertainty, presence and absence, knowledge and silence. They resurface whenever a flight goes missing, whenever a signal cuts out, whenever hope meets the abyss. Night after night, as listeners drift into meditation alongside quiet narration, these stories whisper not only of loss but of enduring human resilience. They challenge us to honor memory while embracing the unknowable, and to persist in seeking answers even when some may forever elude us. May this reflection serve as a quiet companion into rest, a gentle recognition of the mysteries that hover just beyond the edge of light, and a tribute to those whose journeys remain suspended in the vast sky and deep sea, held forever in the embrace of silence and memory. As this journey through the darkest corners of aviation's greatest mysteries draws to a close, it is fitting to pause and reflect not only on what was lost but on what remains. For though the skies have swallowed planes, and though fading echoes may never supplement the silence, what lingers, what endures, is a profound human story. It is a story not of despair alone, but also of remembrance, resilience, and an unyielding search for meaning in the midst of shadows. These vanished flights, suspended between earth and sky, between presence and absence, challenge us to confront the limits of knowledge and the depths of compassion. Each disappearance whispers of lives interrupted, of people whose stories were abruptly folded into the unknown. They were not merely passengers or crews, but mothers, fathers, children, friends, colleagues, dreamers, and doors. Their presence, though suddenly lost, persists in every act of memory, every name spoken aloud, every photograph held close. And through such acts, their absence is not empty but charged, vibrant with meaning. They teach us that grief is not erased by time, nor by silence, but transformed by ritual and remembrance into enduring light. The plane itself, whether resting deep beneath the waves or vanished beyond reach, becomes more than a machine. It becomes a monument, a nexus of human hope and failure, courage and vulnerability. When investigators and families and strangers search skies and seas, they engage in a quest that transcends the physical. They seek connection, understanding, and closure. And even when closure evades them, their perseverance affirms our collective capacity for endurance. While this series has traced the contours of disappearance, the silence, the myth, the technology, the grief, it is also a meditation on the human condition. To fly is to embrace the sublime tenuousness of life, to trust invisible forces and powerful machines, to trust one another. To lose, unexpectedly and without explanation, that trust evokes not only sorrow but existential questioning. Each mystery calls to us as a mirror, reflecting both our limits and our courage. Yet in this confrontation lies subtle comfort. Such mysteries are reminders that the universe holds secrets beyond our grasp, and that mystery itself is a sacred domain. It humbles as it intrigues. It keeps us awake even as we sleep. It reminds us that knowledge is not a conquest but a journey, sometimes with no final destination. To accept this is not to surrender but to acknowledge that life's beauty dances equally with knowledge and wonder. For those who have journeyed with this series, listening into the quiet corners where airplanes vanish and stories dim, may you carry these reflections gently into your heart. Let them be an invitation to embrace mystery with calm and empathy. Let them teach patience toward unanswered questions, and kindness toward those who live with loss without closure. May the stories of vanished flights inspire not only curiosity but reverence, not only investigation but compassion. In the stillness that follows, as you lie ready to drift away, know that you are joining a vast, unseen community of souls united by memory and yearning. The sky arcs infinitely above, the oceans roll endlessly below, and between them, our questions linger timelessly. It is a sacred space, a place where absence holds presence, and silence sings softly. Thank you for sharing this passage through the most mysterious aviation disasters that still haunt our world, through stories marked by loss, silence, and the enduring human spirit. Your companionship in this quiet exploration honors those who have gone missing, and those who continue to seek, to remember, and to hope. May your rest be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your heart steady in the face of the vast and the unknown. Good night, and until we meet again in the soft embrace of stories whispered under the stars.